Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, noon here, Baltics time. Happy Wednesday, happy hump day. Hope everybody is has had a good start to the week and ready to finish the week strong. I am going to do more charts today as usual. But before I get to them, and I want to do a bunch more again on the United States federal budget, because the United States is taking on a lot of projects these days. So people are going to continue to question where they sit. I want to start with a couple geopolitical ones. I find myself watching and thinking about geopolitical news more and more each day, much more than even Bitcoin news, mostly because of my geographic locale, as most of you know. This is, history rhymes, it doesn't repeat. Or maybe more appropriately, it doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And what's happening is really wild. I mean, as I said yesterday, no doubt the world order, that if anyone thought that it was still intact, from the post 1945 80-year American-led, NATO-led, rules-based order, if anybody thought that was still a thing, it's obviously not after last weekend. Just going to show you some people that I typically watch. Times Radio, first of all, is fantastic. British source. By the way, it's the same Times of London that Satoshi Nakamoto inscribed the Genesis block in 4 days ago. 4 days ago, as in 4 days ago, anniversary of 17 years. Diane Francis, Canadian, she's really good geopolitical observer. And I watched this interview. I would recommend it. Talks a lot about the potential pros, potential cons for what can happen with Trump's next year before the midterms, and the endeavors that he's trying to take. Actually, I added the part about the midterms. I think if you saw Stephen Miller, who's like the most fascist type individual in the Trump administration, give this interview to Jake Tapper talking about how they're just going to take Greenland, you can see where it's all going, but it's not necessarily going to happen. It's clearly, as Diane talks about, it's clearly a flex, it's a troll, and the United States is getting ready to, at the very least, negotiate. Rubio talks about buying it, but at the very least, they're going to get more than what they have in Greenland, and perhaps much more, whether it's mineral rights or more bases, whatever it is. Full annexation is very, I think, difficult at this point, but I do want to talk about it. Also, this one, more on Venezuela. I watch this show sometimes, School of War podcast. Really good. So he has Elliot Abrams from the Council on Foreign Relations, former intelligence officer in Latin America. Very, very interesting, talking about why it happened, how the Trump administration has changed with its involvement of the CIA and FBI, obviously, since the first term. Quite interesting to hear how the CIA was basically sitting on their hands for whatever they thought Trump might get into in the first term. Not anymore. So there's that. But no, hold off on that one. Let's look at Greenland for a second here. All right, so we have this map, and their base is up here, which if you could see that the way that the North Pole, whatever it is. It's obviously it's a very strategic view um, for the United States to intercept basically direct strikes from the former Soviet Union here. Perhaps they want more, but again, 80% covered by ice caps, glaciers. Even if that goes down, it's still a very smally, less populated land mass, probably than most places in the world. $56,000 here, it says population. Although Miller said it was 30,000, so I'm not actually sure the latest. And if you follow European military channels, they'll tell you that, it's the Greenlanders that are having discussions all the times with the Danes on, having independence themselves. It's not about joining America. It's about independence from Denmark. So also saw some, some clips, maybe you guys have seen them, where the Russians right now are trying to infiltrate places like in Norway, northern Norway, where there's, the borders basically come together. Nearly at the North Pole, basically on the other side here of where Greenland is, and trying to infiltrate. So Russians trying to speak Norwegian in bad accents, trying to infiltrate Norway right now, which again, in some level, I'm sure they never stopped. But Americans are doing this now in Greenland. So again, it's wild to think it's not the America that I at least believed in when I grew up, but that's what they're doing. Good morning, Anders. How are you feeling this morning about these developments? So I want to keep going on this, and I'll talk about. We'll look at some charts as always, but I saw this post. Maybe you saw it. Trying to talk about, okay, let's look at from a proper map where, Russia could launch most of their missiles in U.S. Direction. Of course, yeah, and their base, of course, is right up here. This is, in my view, kind of what's the word? It's fine to talk about, the need for security, and I'll get into it, but like just kind of posting this map and acting like if you look at a Mercator map, you're stupid to not understand the importance of Greenland to United States security. I'll get into the reasons, again, the pros and the cons or whatever Trump is saying. But this is, again, just a typical, in my view, pretty trolling sort of map from either an American or an Indian or Pakistani or Russian talking about how, this is something the United States should seriously consider. And then David, of course, huge Ukrainian fan, says, and by you posting this, you don't understand that Russian weapons are on subs. They will not be there in time of war. They will be in the Atlantic. I don't want to get into too much of all that stuff. I'm just saying, yes, it is important. Let's talk about the pros and cons of why it's important. But more importantly, let's look a little bit at the history of what could happen. All right, so the United States, Canada, Greenland as part of Denmark, and of course all of Western Europe, and now Eastern Europe, thank God. Sad for Ukraine, but for Eastern Europe, thank God that we are in NATO, but all of us are in NATO. Let's look at what happened in the Soviet times, in the Cold War times. There was the NATO counterpart, if you don't know, it's called the Warsaw Pact, which was basically the Soviet Union, which included a lot of illegally occupied states like mine, Latvia, the Baltic states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria. This is just was the Warsaw Pact, was the counterpart to NATO. And the only wars, really, that, or let's say the invasions that the Warsaw Pact suffered were from itself. Were from itself. Okay, so I think the only official one is this Czechoslovakia invasion in 1968, where they sent in the tanks, all right, and even troops from other Warsaw Pact countries came in. Okay, when the Czechoslovakia uprising was occurring, and squelched it. Okay, but this was not the only one. There was Hungary in 1956 and Poland as well in 1956, 10 years, 12 years before. Although I guess these don't. My father told me these don't kind of officially reach the threshold of invasion level as much as happened for Czechoslovakia. I'm not exactly sure why. Whatever. I mean, troops were sent in, tanks were sent in, as far as I remember or know, in all cases. Maybe Poland's case was the least suppressive. But where the liberal, free, democratic countries of Western Europe were in NATO, not invading themselves, but mostly clear as how, a liberal democracy should behave themselves. It was the communist, dictatorial Soviet Union that came in and invaded countries that were trying to basically have freedom. So you can imagine some of the parallels here. And what scares me a little bit is if now all of a sudden it's NATO countries themselves that might invade each other. Go back to here. Diane does not think it will happen. Most of the people I've been following do not think, on balance, it's going to happen. This is mostly still rhetoric, trolling on the back of the Venezuela. I guess it's not really regime change yet, but extraction of Maduro. Trump's got a. This is me talking now, not really talking about the some of the pundits or people that have much more experience in international relations than I do. Trump's got a year, right? So in November, elections are coming up for the midterms. Trump has got to do what he needs to do before then. And if he falls, or if there are some false starts here, which are a risk, if with this, as I'm sure you guys have seen, the Venezuela regime is still intact completely. Vice president took power. The representatives of China, Iran, North Korea were all in the front row, Russia. So it's not like Trump actually liberated the country yet. Again, I want the best for Venezuelan people, and it's weird. It's a different situation. Trump is pro-business. He's pro-capitalism. But this is no doubt where right now, like, if anybody was disillusioned, we're realigning the system. So most of these people don't think he's actually going to go in, but he, basically going to get whatever they want: mineral rights, bases, whatever. And by the way, most of which Denmark and or the Greenlanders would have offered anyway without this bluster. So the question is, why the bluster to me? And I'm not quite convinced it's the right move, okay? Because what I am 100% clear on is that these things were always in his mind, and this is why he was so eager to appease Putin. I never really believed in the idea that he had, compromise. It's possible that there's some golden shower compromise of Trump in a Moscow hotel from the Steele dossier that was actually, that is true. It still has not been proven. Nobody's seen the evidence, whatever. But Trump is like Teflon Don at this point. There's not like, you can't be this Epstein adjacent and have so much dirt on you and actually care about anything anymore. So I really had a hard time believing it was compromise that was having him be such, I could use cruder terms, but be such an appeaser to Putin. You know, as John Bolton said, Trump thinks Putin is his friend, thinks that the international relations, like if he's buddies with Putin and Xi, then the United States is going to have a good relationship with Russia, a dictator power that, you know, suppresses their people, murders journalists, have no property rights, no courts, absolutely no free rule of law or decentralized government. So he thinks that, and he still does, but it's starting to become a little bit clearer to me now that the real reason he's doing it is indeed he thinks that he can go to this old school three sphere of influence power where it's not, you know, the Soviet Union and America, but it's Russia and America and also China now, much stronger China. That is indeed to me the like kind of the end game that he's going for here, and just to be in the history books. You know, I mean, if America took Greenland, it would be the first large-scale annexation since they purchased Alaska like 150 years ago from the Russians. Which, by the way, the Russians have been trolling that they're going to take that back, like they had the power. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of how I'm seeing this. But it's extremely, extremely dangerous because if they actually decided to go that far to actual military intervention, you would have Europeans mobilized. They might not do anything. They might just stand there, you know, and not shoot Americans as Americans come in. But Europeans, as I showed in the video yesterday, have a much better sense of the cold, fighting in the cold. They have many more icebreakers. Maybe Poland, or sorry, not Poland, Finland, I know was going to sell like a bunch of icebreakers to them. I don't know the status of that deal, but maybe they hold that off. There will be a lot of things that Europe, this would be a red line for Europe itself. And NATO would be done for sure. So you know, NATO's gone, US is out of NATO. Would Trump take it that far? I tend to not think so and agree with these individuals. I highly recommend this interview, but you never know. I mean, this is where he's going. Sorry, Anders, I'm just getting your. Yeah, no, I mean it's a serious situation here. Your prime minister said that, you know, NATO is over if they go in, and I think it would be. So this is going to be a very interesting question. Good morning, Sandro. Happy belated New Year. Merry Christmas. Yes, it's going to be a crazy one, indeed. I'm talking about today if America can afford it. All right, same as I showed yesterday, but a little bit more detail here. So, again, Michael Weiss, I've shown you guys many times, one of my favorites. If it's a negotiating tactic, it's still dire. What if it isn't? Why the hell are we doing this when we have every strategic advantage in Greenland already and have it without risking the foundational principles of NATO? So, you know, it remains to be seen here. This is also important context. All right, perhaps you saw this. He says, we need Greenland for national security, not for its minerals. If you look up and down the coast of Greenland, this is a fascist statement right here. If you look up and down the coast of Greenland, you can see Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. Of course, this is Orla now saying you're lying. This is literally the language that Hitler used to Chamberlain in 1938 March. Sorry, 1980. Wait, do I have those dates right? 1938 October. So when he went into the Sudetenland, he literally said the same thing around here, Czechoslovakia. He said, there are Czech border guards murdering our soldiers at the moment. He said it at the moment. He said that to Chamberlain. He's got to go in. We need peace in our time. And he said that. So, I mean, the language can't. Sorry, I had to put some humor back in here. I mean, if you guys haven't seen these memes with Rubio. They get better and better. Him just sitting there despising the fact. This is from the Zelensky meeting, the disastrous Zelensky meeting in February, where JD Vance is lopping it up like an absolute douchebag. And Rubio is just sitting like deeper and deeper in his chair, the last guy in the Trump administration that has any semblance of decency. But I mean, he's now got like 15 jobs, and this is if he goes to be in charge of Greenland as well. Yeah, I've seen reports as that as well. I mean, it's definitely happening. There's going to be this is all a prelude to a negotiation, and Trump's going to get something, right? If his idea is, which is, could be a very simple negotiation, right? If his idea is threaten full takeover and then back it up, this is actually exactly what Kaya Kallas has always said the Soviets did, right? The Soviets know that, or they knew that the Americans, the Western Europeans, they never wanted to kill their soldiers or have their soldiers just be thrown to the meat waves like the Soviets would. So they would just invade, repress, do whatever, annoy the Westerners, the Americans who had the rule of law, and then they would say, okay, well, we can stop doing this, but you got to give us, the Baltics, or you got to give us this and that, and they would get more than they had before. It's a very simple negotiating tactic, basically, if you're a raw power. So you have, let's say at this point, not as much as you want. You go full court press, and then as a negotiating tactic, you back off of the full invasion, and then you have more than what you want. It's totally possible that he ends up just doing that for Greenland. I have a list. I can't actually share the list, but it's a very simple list. I have 2 pros and 2 cons. So if he takes Greenland by force, let's say, the pros are he gets more like pure unencumbered defense space for America, and also he gets all the minerals, which probably all his buddies are going to lop up. The cons would be NATO destroyed, and also here's a pretty crucial one. A con would be that U.S. bases in Europe would be at risk. Not all of them. In fact, I can tell you pretty confidently, sadly, where I live right now, the Baltics, we will be the last to go as far as waving American support goodbye. Like we need it. We just need it. We need European support too. But having an ally threaten the rest of our allies would be very difficult on us, of course. But we would probably be the last ones to say, we certainly wouldn't send American troops home for no reason. Denmark might, but we would not. Germany might, but we would not. So it's very tricky. But there are a ton of U.S. ports around Europe, and I think you probably would see Europe finally throw some swagger around and not allow the U.S. to just do whatever they want with the ports that they currently have if they're going to full on go in and take over Greenland. So that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. So I think what I explained is my idea of what they're doing right now. They're going to Soviet style full court press and then back it off and say, oh, look, we gave you something in the negotiations, and then just get more than what perhaps they could have. The thing is, they could get all of it anyway. They could go to the Greenlanders, they could go to the Danes, they could say, look, freedom for the Greenlanders, we'll be a part of it. We want this and that and this and that bases and, all the mineral rights possible. But that's where they're going. And Rubio, meanwhile, is now, a potential leader of Venezuela, Cuba, Greenland, and the Shah of Iran. Iran news is pretty wild. I'm sure you guys have seen. It's pretty amazing what's happening there. Again, this is different than. This is obviously different than this situation. Like here, it's just tyranny and oppression. But it's not that way now. I mean, for these countries, most all of them, except for Hungary, respect the rule of law, have decentralized governments, have independent judiciaries and anti-corruption boards. Ukraine, of course, is trying to join this, but America is the one that's not playing by the rules. I heard another statement a while back. This is really unrelated, but it was Victor Davis Hanson, who is a good historian, and he said, none of the other great powers in the history of the world played by their own rules, but America did. And I actually do kind of believe that. Like we would handicap ourselves in certain. Of course, at the end of the day, it was always better for America, whatever happened in the last 80 years. But take away the Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam invasions. I'm sure there's going to be some more, but the big ones. It was never a direct threat and takeover like Russia did, Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. And I know most of the Germans now wouldn't agree with a lot of this, but it was never that intention. Americans would typically play by the rules. Again, huge mistakes in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, obviously taken over from the French, but this is totally different. And he's got a year to do it. I think he's got a year. If he somehow manages to get elections canceled in November, which I don't think the Americans will let happen, problem. Also, if these interventions backfire, right? Like, who's going to say he plays this well with Greenland? What if Finland decides to hold back their icebreakers from this deal that apparently Trump did with them last year? What if this new Venezuelan regime, which is the same as the old regime, just completely cracks down, suppresses everybody, and Venezuela is less free than it ever was? Trump doesn't want to go in with troops, so he's playing this bluff, this chicken game, and I'm not sure it's going to work out. They've been after Greenland before that. I believe you can find offers in the 1800s to buy Greenland. So let's see where I wanted to take this. This is still Russia stuff. Don't want to go back to that. So let's see how Trump could do this. All right, I showed this yesterday, and I think it's even going to be more helpful now. So on the fiscal side, this is the American budget. All right, let's take this off. This is per dollar tax. All right, we got 100 years of this or so, even more. So for $1 tax received, this is typically what the U.S. government spends. Okay, so they'll spend this dollar, and they go in the red. All right, these are deficits, and the cumulative combination of deficits is the national debt. All right, so there's your $38 trillion. But I'm not going to focus on the debt amount. I'm just going to focus on the actual year-to-year, month-to-month spend. Okay, so Great Depression, World War II, World War I, even massive deficits. Most of the time, 40 cents. Okay, so right here, for example, 1983, they took in 100 pennies in tax. They spent, in the same time period, 140 pennies. All right, $40 in the red. Here you see Bill Clinton's famous balancing of the budget. Lasted a few months. This was like a big deal when I was growing up. It's like Clinton balanced the budget. That's how long that lasted. And then you can see again what it did to the actual debt. Slowed it down, but then good old baby Bush took it off again. Okay, so global financial crisis, a lot of spending. The word that I can't stay, not that I have a huge following, also massive spending. They're certainly above average. I think the average is like 23 cents or 25 cents deficit. So they're 45 cents right now. what I talked about yesterday, and then just to show this, firstly, let's look at interest. Okay, so this is just the component of cents on the dollar. All right, so the deficit doesn't really even necessarily matter. You can say it's a part of the total package, right? So interest is at the moment 24 cents on the dollar, but again, they spend not just a dollar; they spend $1.45, $1.50. So 24 cents. A lot of people say the interest is going to explode, this and that. It hasn't exploded yet. It's high. It's a higher level, but we've been up to the 30 cents in the 80s and 90s, 30 cents on the dollar of tax in interest, and in the Great Depression it was even more. Okay, it's just the raw interest payment. So it's not like it's exploded the budget, even though people talk about it. Also, it's true. I want to get military spending on here. I don't have it right now, but it's about the same. So another 20 cents on the dollar. So right there, that's 40, even probably closer to 50 cents is interest in the military. So the remaining 50 cents goes all to entitlements and more, all to pensions and more. But the question is, a lot of people talk about, right, when there is a deficit, can they afford it? If they can't afford it, then they print it. So now I'm going to show you the print as a positive number, not a, had it sort of different before, okay? So let's just look at deficits. Let's even take off the interest, okay? Just this is now how the central bank has interacted with the government. All right, when they had 142 cents, that is a dollar, that means they spent $2.42, $1.42 in a deficit in the 30s in the Great Depression. This is when the Federal Reserve actually really intervened. And this is pretty interesting because Ben Bernanke used to say the Federal Reserve didn't do enough. Maybe not, but they still did a lot, more than they've ever done right here. Also here, when the U.S. entered the war, they put 18 cents on the dollar into the budget. So this is what it means. This is a visual representation of when they say, if you can't borrow the difference, then you print. Okay. So this is the total borrowing, let's say. But the borrowing that the markets can't absorb, or that the United States doesn't want to absorb and wants to artificially lower interest rates by printing, that comes from here. Right? As a positive, basically, as to offset. So what you notice is it's never like the full amount, but it's close. All right, so here's QE 1, 2, 3, a lot of money printing, and then the crazy season. And also, again, notice when Bitcoin pumped in 2017, there was zero money printing by the Fed. I know it might be different now, but there was zero money printing. Okay. When I say I know it might be different now, I mean I know it's possible that Bitcoin could skyrocket if we start to print, but there was zero money printing in 2017. In fact, they were decreasing the size of their balance sheet. Right? They were going negative. All right. But then that leads us to today. Where are we today? So very interestingly, what Powell has done is been decreasing the Federal Reserve's balance sheet by, a lot each month. And it's actually if you put this into deficit terms, right? They're buying less treasuries. What you see here is basically cents on the dollar of less treasuries that are purchased. All right, so this is even more money that has to be made up by the other buyers of U.S. treasuries, foreigners or Americans themselves. But that's coming to an end. And Trump, of course, wants to have it come to an end. He wants to print. But the point is, even though people talk about how the United States has a ton of debt, and I know that they do, I'm not defending it, Trump has a lot of runway for all of these endeavors this year to do like this. If he wants to just go crazy and take over Venezuela, take over Cuba, take over Greenland, it's not without precedent. They're very cool on the money printing at the moment. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly Trump is happy they're out. Um, Moscow had like 50% of the old state oil company after they came in and defended Maduro from his last election, his last fake election. Actually, I think it was two fake elections ago. I think it was during Trump's first term. Um, so yeah, but Trump is at least trying to take it back. But we'll see. I mean, he's not going to do it militarily, so it's going to have to be like CIA run and the same old stuff the United States would always try to do. Um, Here's another thing. Again, as we are so over here in Eastern Europe, very fearful for what crazy Russia things Russia could do. You know, why would he say? Ask yourself this. Like, he says you can see Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. As we know, this is a very fascist comment that's not happening at all. And even if it was, um, Greenland and Denmark or Denmark would allow the U.S. to do whatever they needed to defend the hemisphere. But is Russia a threat or are they not? Steve Witkoff gaslights everybody on this platform, gets on Twitter and says Putin is a great guy. And Tucker eats it up. He loves it, the fascist that he is. And Witkoff says Putin is a great guy. And then Trump says here, we need Greenland to defend against Russian and Chinese ships. So is Russia a threat or are they not? You know, is Ukraine fighting for freedom or are they fighting a good guy, like Witkoff says? They can't get their narrative fully straight, and it might backfire. I'm not hoping that anything bad happens to the United States or whatever, or any of us, but I hope all these regimes can go down and we can all have freedom. But it's a total realignment now, and Ukraine is basically fighting for Europe. If Europe hasn't understood that yet, then they're starting to. Let's just say that they're starting to. But I'll be looking at this. I think we should all be looking at this. Basically, the deficit is big, the debt is big, 38 trillion. You know, there's going to be another review of a government shutdown already by the end of this month. Like that just happened in September or October. It's going to happen again. They're going to review if the government needs to shut down all the spending. There's going to be a lot of political drama, all the rest. But the brass tacks about inflation is, especially if you're the superpower, a lot of this stuff is all in the past, right? I mean, it's not like, I mean, the inflation of these years is all, it's already in our currency, right? It's here. We eat it up. It's there. And the dollar hasn't collapsed yet. And the United States is theoretically stronger than ever before as far as projecting power and doing things like no United States leader actually has ever done. And I think Trump gets a huge hard on for that. But he could go very big this year. There's a very limited size of balance sheet for the central bank. Relative to the debt, relative to where it's been in the past, and the deficits as well. The central bank has not printed, as you see, they have not literally increased or helped the deficit in any way since October of 2022, November. Since November 2022, the Federal Reserve has not contributed to covering the deficit at all. So he's got, again, I'm not defending it. I'm not saying this is a great, way to manage affairs as the world's hegemon. And I showed this yesterday. I just showed again, right? You could theoretically double the size of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet relative to the United States national debt and not be at a record level. I'm not saying they're going to do it. I don't know, but they got plenty of room now to unload and print more. I don't know about you guys, wherever you're sitting in the world, but for us, it seems pretty dangerous. Uh, if you just say it clearly that Russia's the enemy and that you're going to defend sovereignty and defend freedom, great. But if you start saying things like, actually, Russian ships are by Greenland and we might need to invade Greenland, we might need to take it over, that's not exactly clear messaging for private property, capitalism, freedom, liberty, alliances, supporting, uh, people. Supporting people in need, by the way. I mean, does Trump really care about the people of Venezuela? Does someone think that Trump cares about the people of Venezuela? If this new regime, this new vice president, who's the exact same, you know, regime as Maduro, cracks down even harder, is he going to send boots in on the ground? Yeah. Western Europe. Let's be clear here. Let's be clear with our terms. Western Europe. I mean, Eastern Europe is small, very small, unfortunately, but you're right in that Western Europe is has been just terrible. I think you could even make the case, and I want to get some more stats to show this, but you could very easily make the case that the Western European sort of post World War II way of life, the social welfare program, was funded by the United States, or let's say subsidized by the United States security umbrella, simply for the fact that the US or Western Europe did not have to pay for their own security because the United States was covering them. And so they went on and, you know, started this huge nanny state. So, what do you mean? Do you mean like what Hungary is trying to do? Federalized Europe? Like more power for the states in Europe, not the European Union? I would be fine with every capital having as much power as they possibly could have, but at the end of the day, security is security. Um, I would be in favor of stripping every single line item out of the European Union except for collective defense. To me, it's all about defense. And these Hungarians, they're the biggest losers about all of this. I mean, they're the poorest country in the EU right now. And so if people are saying that this model, the Hungarian model, by the way, Trump is a huge fan of Orban. That's why I keep saying for the next 4 months, it's going to be it's going to be insane. The Hungarian elections are coming up in April. Viktor Orban is losing badly. Viktor Orban is a thief, corrupt. Watch, there's this Hungarian documentary. It's called like Dynastia or something in Hungarian. I've said it's called Dynasty in Hungarian. You can watch it with subtitles on YouTube. It's just tracking how the Orban family has quite clearly taken all of their wealth from public procurement programs. They own all the rich luxury hotels in Budapest, like all of them. And Hungary is the poorest country in Europe per capita. Right? It's not as bad as Venezuela, but it's bad. And so the opposition now, who wants freedom, normal freedom, democracy, liberty, private property. I mean, it's going to be a huge fight. It's going to be crazy. As far as European focus entertainment, political theater goes, it's in my opinion, it's going to be on Hungary for the next 4 months. And Trump loves Hungary. Trump loves Orban. So what is he going to do if this? I mean, what is he going to do if Orban steals the election? Is he going to support it? Probably. He's probably going to support Viktor Orban in his theft of the election. Totally agree. Totally agree with this. I mean, you can't act like historical precedents don't matter. You know, I mean, I don't know how Venezuela or the Cubans or maybe the Colombians, that's he's going after Colombia next. I don't know how they get their freedom other than rising up. And we're in such a dangerous world right now, it seems like, unlike when the Soviet Union fell, although we did have casualties when the Soviet Union fell. We did have uh, the Soviets come in with the tanks. They killed people, but it was by the dozens, not by maybe, the thousands or the tens of thousands. I mean, if Cubans really want to rise up and have freedom, and the corrupt regimes that control those countries, which are all socialist and terrible, but if they really want freedom, I mean, I don't know right now how those countries get it peacefully. Other than rising up. Another thing, of course, I didn't say yet that I've been thinking about a lot is, right, I mean, this is the world that Putin wants back as well, right? He wants a new Warsaw Pact, even though Poland, the Baltics, were never going back in the Soviet Union or the Soviet sphere of influence ever. Uh, if the U.S. did fully take Greenland, if they went in militarily to annex it, that is a win for Putin. Mm, that's a good point. That's a good point too. Yeah, Germany in particular. I don't know, man. What happened? I mean, they're certainly getting better now. When are German elections coming up again? I mean, I know Merz is just in, but are there like we have a full 4 years, right, before anything happens in German parliamentary procedures? Are there any other things that are going to happen? Because I've said before that thing that scared me was the youth vote in the last election. It was like the youth was 20% AFD and 25% that crazy leftish socialist party. So it's like half the youth is basically voting for non just stable standard property loving parties. Okay, that's interesting. I have to look at it. I have to look at it. Yeah, the Lands, right? The Land elections. Yes, you're right. There's very good news. I mean, I'm heartened there. I'm heartened. I mean, it's been an enormous cost for Ukraine, but that is good news. By the way, another thing that uh, Ms. Francis said in this interview, which is might come true, is she said that with all this chaos, South Korea and Japan might go nuclear this year. Obviously, they have the capability, they have large economies, but Ukraine has basically shown everybody that, you know, if it's great power politics again, you might need to go nuclear. And then you get back to Europe. The big question is Germany getting the bomb, which I know is like nowhere near happening now, but um, um, how is Europe going to distribute nuclear authority? It's basically just France is the only one that is purely French. Britain has Britain has some reliance on the United States, actually, to launch a warhead. There's not a fully British system. I've heard the idea that maybe you have a Nordic and Baltic command, but I don't really know how that works with. And I'm also not sure if the Nordics would let us in on that. But if you had, you know, all the Nordic countries, that means Finland and Iceland included with the Scandic plus the Baltic. Are you in America right now? It's early if you are, but I hope so. I mean, I hope that that's the view. Yeah, they're gonna have to reverse engineer all that stuff, right, and make sure there's no. I haven't followed all of this as much, but I know that the Portuguese said they were going to stop buying the Danes. Or no, you just said the Danes were kept buying, so maybe. But there's been a lot of halts on F-35s from Europe by certain NATO members, and then the ones that keep buying are wondering if they would be overridden by some Apple update backdoor thing. I don't know. What did I want to show you next? This is just another. It's the same chart about the tax and spend, but as a percentage of debt. Again, I don't know the future with how the dollar will do, but just to show you sort of precedent. So again, you have to sort of zoom in the old days to see how kind of crazy it was. Like literally, uh, so when the second bank occurred, and there were some wars here leading up to the Civil War, you'd be taken out 8 times as much in debt as your debt actually existed. Of course, that was when Andrew Jackson completely removed the debt. It's just interesting to see how things could be back in the old days. Completely different time. Doesn't really make sense till today. I know analog, not digital, but you do have the data. When the Civil War happened, they were borrowing 2-3 times what the debt was. Obviously, you see the debt itself exploding. Same thing, World War I, World War II. But anyway, if you see like sort of the modern era, as a percentage of debt running at a 6%. This is not percentage of GDP. Sometimes you hear that. This is just a percent of the debt itself. Again, I'm making the case that Trump has room here. It's not that high. I know it's a high debt dollar value, but as a percentage, relative terms, it's not that high. Tax is also not that high, unfortunately. This is kind of interesting, right? So, was that an all-time high? Yeah, it was. As the Vietnam War drew down, America was still being taxed quite high. In the 70s, they actually earned, 1 year of tax receipts was 70% of the debt. That's wild, wild fact. Now that's 1 year of tax receipts is 13% of the debt. Interest rate, again, not that high. Even though people say it's high and it's high dollar amount, it's not actually. I mean, you were at 15% here. Now you're down to like 3.5. I think this is the 10-year. I should have put it on here. This is probably, it's probably even less, but this is the 10-year Treasury effective yield. And then the print as a percentage of the debt, again, so the higher it is, the more you're printing to subsidize the deficit and increase the debt. It's pretty low. It's negative now, right? So the Federal Reserve is decreasing their balance sheet still. So negative 0.8% of the debt. So we've got plenty of room this year if he wants. Have we talked about Bitcoin? I'm showing this every day now. I know it's a little bit. I've been working hard on a lot of stuff on my back end, so I don't have a lot of other Bitcoin charts at the moment, but price has been up since the Maduro capture. Went up from the mid 80s, as you guys know, to low 90s, right at the median. Mm. Also, don't want to make bad decisions, right? So, easier said than done. But so after the United States basically became a superpower, which was after World War II. I mean, it was, certainly not as involved before. The military economy was retooled into the normal economy. People started producing dishwashers and dryers and refrigerators instead of tanks. But there wasn't, as far as central bank inflation, it was high at 10%, right? 10% of the debt, but it wasn't crazy. I think, in my opinion, and I think most people probably agree, it was the problems happened when they decided to go to Vietnam, because then you see the print rises and the debt rises, and the print as a percentage of the debt rises all the way until the war ended. And then once the war ended, the debt rose even faster. I know I talk about this a lot. Sorry if this was a repeating for people, but the debt rose even faster. We're on a dollar standard, not a gold standard, and people would accept the dollars instead of the gold. And you actually get this ratio looking better. Central bank holding less debt itself proportionally, but actually more was always rising. So that's what I'm saying. It's not I'm not defending the fact that they might massively increase the money print and the debt. But if you look, at least in the perspective of the last, 20 years, it's low. Of course, it's not as low as it was pre-GFC. It's also kind of interesting that, this, by the way, was the Wall Street bailouts. They swapped treasury bonds for corporate bonds on their books. That's why this went way low. And then they swapped them back with like guarantees and stuff. And that's why it looks all weird. Everything is just completely. There's a lot of manipulation from this point, let's say. I know the markets are always manipulated. I'm not making that case, but things got really weird from here. But you couldn't really tell, at least by this chart, that a global financial crisis was coming, right? It's kind of interesting. If you look at this chart, you also can't really tell. I mean, it's you're running in deficit, but it's not like, the United States was at war unjustly. But it's not like this is an interesting. I had a point here. I've said this a few times, but it's just like, the government situation might not always be the reason why there are crises, right? We had these mortgage-backed securities, had a lot of problems outside of just typical debt creation and deficit spending before the crisis. And it doesn't really show that we would have had a crisis, right? You can see after it, they did crazy things, but good morning, MP. Was that Sminston? I need to see if he updated that. He's got a good chart with copper, Bitcoin. This isn't copper, but it's related now. He did this, the PMI. I would say if this turns, then the cycles are 100% over. This is actually, in my opinion, the best analysis that the cycles are over, because it's going to take time to get to the peak. See the peak here, peak here, peak here, right? But we're we're underwater for all these, not underwater, but we're very low activity. But once you go risk on, it's going to take a few months, right? It's not going to be tomorrow where we get to this level or this level or this level, right? Which were our peaks. So I'd say if this holds, and this is a very interesting chart, follow Sminston if you don't. It's not going to be overnight that we go to here. This one seemed pretty quick, but it's going to take a few months. So I'd say if this takes a year and then we peak and this peaks, then this is a better analysis, that it actually follows the business cycle more than the 4-year cycle. I would say that 100%. Yeah. But I'm not fully here yet. I mean, I this is a very interesting chart, I would say, and copper will give you basically the same picture. I guess I have just an affinity for the 4-year cycle thing, for simplistic models, like the power curve kind of is. It makes sense. Let's see. But yeah, if this follows, and if our next Bitcoin blow off top or just top is when there's a top here, then watch the business cycles, not the 4-year cycle. And again, to repeat myself, I would say for sure, this does not mean that we're booming overnight. You still have, months or years to get to that peak from the business cycle low. Unless, of course, Trump juices the interest rates to levels we've never seen, which, as I said, he has room to do, especially if he gets a yes man in the Federal Reserve. Did I have any other Twitter? Yeah, these do. This is good comic relief for me, at least. This one just caught my eye. I haven't read. I've read a lot of books about Ames and CIA, but we had a few uh, defectors in the Cold War times, and it's damaging. But it's also important to point out that, or at least I'm going to point it out to you since I live over here, when the United States, wow, look at that, Snoop Dogg is hosting a Spaces, and I appreciate you guys being with me. 350. Well, Snoop's got 10K. Thank you. I'll finish soon if you want to tune over to that one. Um, the how did I want to say this? When the Soviet Union ended, and I believe still to this day, but I'll try to give you some quotes on that. Russia had more agents in the United States than the CIA had in the world. I know exactly who said this. Of course, CIA is not going to publish such stats like this, I'm sure, all the time. But this was a CIA senior officer, retired, that made the statement. I'll find it for you tomorrow. But like, I'll just say again, if you're thinking that these guys are the good guys or somehow, Putin takes care of his people, they're not going to stop their ways. See? uh, I guess I should stop talking about politics and just tune into something like this, huh? It'd be more fun. That's all I had for you guys today. Uh, plenty of room to print, plenty of room to spend. Even though people like to talk about how the United States is going to default or whatever, fortunately or unfortunately, we're going to see the United States as big a hegemon as they have ever been. Trump is flexing here. It's going to be a really wild year, I can tell you. So I'm happy to be here with you guys talking about it for sure until April. For European sovereignty, democracy, freedom, the Hungarian elections are a big one. And we'll have to see. All right. Thank you guys for watching. If you want, go enjoy Snoop. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care.